You ever get that weird gut feeling that something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That's where I was standing, literally, in the middle of my living room, suitcase still in hand, after coming back from a 3-day business trip. Things between me and Dana, my wife, had been rocky lately. Not full-on War of the Roses rocky, but definitely enough to make me wonder when exactly the honeymoon ended and the awkward roommate phase began. We're still young, been married just a few years, and out of nowhere, arguments started popping up like weeds. Little things, like me leaving my shoes by the door, or how I chew, or that I breathe in a passive-aggressive way. Her words, not mine. It didn't help that Dana had started suggesting I might be mentally unwell. Not jokingly either. Like, she'd toss it into a conversation between sips of oat milk latte and casually mention, maybe you should talk to someone. Professionally. Not exactly what you want to hear over breakfast. The last straw came one evening after yet another discussion that somehow spiraled from me forgetting to buy almond butter into a heated debate about emotional safety and personal space. In the heat of the moment, I might have thrown the word divorce out there. Not as a threat, just, out of frustration. Stupid, I know. Next morning, she packed a bag and said she was going to recharge with her girlfriends for a few days. Hiking, yoga, wine therapy, whatever they do. Meanwhile, I had a work trip scheduled and hit the road, thinking maybe some space would help both of us cool down. Fast forward to me stepping into the house again. At first glance, everything looked normal. Immaculate even. Like the cleaning fairy had stopped by and sprinkled a little lemon-scented perfection on everything. But I swear something felt off. Maybe it was just my paranoia. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was the fact that the painting covering the old safe in my office was ever so slightly crooked. Now let me explain this safe. It's not just any safe. It's an old-school, heavy-as-a-tank, mechanical dial safe that my grandfather built into the wall behind a painting of some overly dramatic ship in a storm. Total pirate vibes. I always thought it was kinda cool. A secret spot in plain sight. Dana knew about it, but I always joked that it was just full of old family junk, which wasn't entirely a lie, but it definitely wasn't the whole truth. Truth is, that safe held some real legacy. Letters from my grandparents, old photos, and yeah, some serious stuff too. Deeds to land my family owns down south, documents tied to the house I inherited, access papers for an art collection that's now sitting in climate-controlled storage, and, cherry on top, some legacy account info tied to a trust. It wasn't Fort Knox, but it was my little vault of family history and legal stuff I hadn't even told Dana much about. Thing is, a few weeks ago, I had this strange itch in the back of my mind. Call it intuition, or just a healthy mistrust of mechanical locks, but I moved all the critical stuff into a bank deposit box. What was left in the safe? Mostly sentimental things. Stuff you can't really insure, like my grandpa's old war letters, some photos, and a pocket watch that doesn't even tick anymore but meant the world to me. So, imagine my face when I open the safe. And it's empty. Not someone took a few things empty. I mean barren desert empty. Like tumbleweed should have rolled out when I opened it. My heart did that weird sinking thing, like the floor disappeared under me, and I swear, my first thought wasn't even, who did this? It was how. Only Dana knew about the safe, and she didn't know the code. At least I never told her. So yeah, either I sleepwalked my way into some home burglary, or someone who shouldn't have been poking around in my business was. And now, I need answers. Fast. I pulled out my phone and stared at Dana's name on the screen. Let's find out how much she really doesn't know. I didn't even wait to sit down. I dropped my bag, paced for maybe 2 full laps around the kitchen island, and called Dinah. She picked up on the third ring with a casual, "Hey babe, what's up?" Like I was about to ask her if we needed milk. "You need to come home," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Someone broke into the safe." There was a pause, followed by a dry little laugh. "Mark? Seriously? Again with the safe?" And here we go. She slipped right back into that patronizing tone she'd started using lately, the one that makes you feel like a crazy uncle at Thanksgiving. "I'm telling you, someone cleaned it out," I said, louder this time. And you're the only person who even knew it existed, let alone where it was." She let out a breath. "Honey, didn't you used to say it was just some junk in there? Like old papers and junky photos? Why are you freaking out like it was the crown jewels?" I gritted my teeth. It doesn't matter what was in it. What matters is someone got in and no one else should have even known it was there. Except you. "Oh, please," she fired back. "I haven't even been there. I've been with the girls, 2 hours away. I've got photos, videos, timestamps, GPS, receipts, TikToks, and whatever else you need to prove it. So maybe calm down before you spiral into another episode." And there it was again, that little jab, the subtle accusation that I'm losing it, paranoid, unstable. She'd been planting those seeds for weeks now, and I was getting real sick of it. Still, she came back that evening, lip gloss perfect, fake concerned tone loaded up and ready. Meanwhile, I'd already called the cops. Not exactly NYPD Blue, but they sent out a guy, Officer Rivas, who looked more like he'd rather be watching a game than poking around my quiet suburban home. He went through the motions, asked the right questions, looked at the safe, shrugged at the lack of scratches or forced entry. "No sign of a break-in," he said, flipping through a little notepad like it owed him something. "Could it be you just moved the stuff and forgot?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Dana beat me to it, with a chuckle no less. "Oh, Mark, didn't you used to joke that the safe was just for show? You said it was full of old receipts and a broken watch. Now suddenly it's Ocean's 11? The officer laughed. Right in front of me. And Dana, like she was doing improv night at the comedy club, added, "Besides, last week he lost his laptop for like 2 days, and it turned out he shoved it under the couch in his sleep. Right, babe?" She looked at me with this smile that didn't reach her eyes. Such a scatterbrain lately. And just like that, the narrative flipped. I could see it happen. Officer Rivas closed his little notebook like the case had just solved itself. A man with memory issues and a flair for dramatics. "Well," he said, "if anything turns up, give us a call." Translation: "We're out of here, buddy." So I played along. I laughed weakly, rubbed the back of my neck, muttered something about probably moving the stuff and forgetting. Just a mix-up. Nothing to see here. But inside, I was boiling. I'm not crazy. I didn't misplace decades of family history, and I sure as hell didn't forget. Someone went in that safe. Someone who knew where it was, knew the timing, knew just how to make me look like the fool. And I had a feeling that someone wasn't working alone. That night, as I laid in bed next to Dana, who fell asleep suspiciously fast, I might add, I couldn't shake the feeling that this whole thing stank of something bigger. And worse. Not just dishonesty, not just betrayal. It smelled like strategy. And then, uninvited but crystal clear, a face appeared in my mind. Dana's mother, Victoria. Immaculate hair, constant smile, voice like syrup over ice. She always looked the part. Elegant, poised, like she had a private stylist and a secret wine cellar. But there was something off about her, something behind the eyes, a slyness. The kind of woman who offers you pie while checking how much your watch costs. Victoria had always been too friendly, too interested, too involved. And now, for the first time in years, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe all those sugary little chats of hers had more bite than sweetness. One thing was clear. If I wanted answers, I was going to have to find them myself, because I had this creeping suspicion that my loving wife, and maybe her picture-perfect mother, knew a hell of a lot more than they were letting on. And I don't care how many GPS-tagged selfies Dana took. Something in this house wasn't right, and I was going to find out what. Over the next week, I turned into a low-budget James Bond. The kind without gadgets, budget, or backup, but plenty of motivation. Dana had no idea, but I'd quietly installed a few discreet cameras around the house. One in my office, one in the front hallway, and one on the back porch, pointed right at the sliding glass door. Nothing fancy, just enough to let me keep an eye on things. If someone was poking around my life, I wanted to be the first to know about it this time. From the get-go, Dana seemed off, even more than usual. She was tense, on edge, The kind of restless that makes you wonder if someone's keeping a secret or trying not to spill one. Every time her phone buzzed, she'd walk out of the room to take the call, and I started noticing a pattern. Every time the name Mom popped up on her screen, she'd practically sprint outside like the walls had ears. I reviewed the footage religiously, sometimes even in the middle of meetings at work. Just had a browser tab open in the corner like I was checking my calendar, when in reality, I was checking if my wife was giving my heirlooms a grand tour. For the first few days, nothing unusual, until I caught sight of Victoria. She came by twice during the week, both times while I was at work. She used her spare key, the one Dana swore was, just in case of emergencies, and strolled in like she owned the place. She didn't take anything, at least not visibly, but she moved with purpose, like she was inspecting something. She walked into the kitchen, then the living room, lingered in my office. That was the big red flag. She stared at my bookshelves, peeked into drawers, even straightened the crooked painting that hid the safe. I sat there watching it all, my blood pressure doing somersaults. That's when things really started to click. I began replaying old conversations in my head, the ones where Victoria had shown an oddly strong interest in my family's past. She'd ask things like, "So your grandfather left you the house but nothing else?" Or, "Wasn't he into collecting old documents or something?" Stuff that seemed harmless at the time, just your average in-law small talk, but now, in hindsight, sounded like a pre-theft Q&A session. The audio on the cameras was hit or miss, mostly miss. The conversations between Dana and Victoria were muffled, barely audible over background noise. I played back everything I could, tweaking the volume, hoping for a smoking gun. But all I got were bits of casual small talk, nothing that screamed conspiracy. Still, there was one clip that shook me. Dana handed Victoria something in a small zippered pouch, subtle, almost boring if you weren't watching for it. But I was watching, and suddenly I wasn't just suspicious, I was sure. Dana was involved. At the very least, she knew, and she was playing dumb, like she hadn't heard me shout about that empty safe just days ago. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I played it cool, or at least tried to. That evening, while she was scrolling through her phone like nothing happened, I brought it up as casually as I could manage. "Hey, remember that safe thing?" I said. "Still kinda bugs me. I mean, someone had to open it, right?" She didn't even look up. "Mark, you're still on that? It's just junk, you said so yourself. You're obsessing over something that doesn't matter." Her tone was ice. Not annoyed, careful. Like she'd practiced sounding just annoyed enough to shut me down, but not enough to sound panicked. That's when I knew I was getting too close for her comfort. I nodded, pretended to let it go. But in my head, wheels were turning. I couldn't do this alone anymore. Whatever was going on, I was outnumbered, and possibly outplayed. Time to collect more evidence, and maybe call in a little outside help. I spent the better part of a Sunday hunched over my desk, transferring every second of camera footage to an external hard drive. The video quality wasn't great. These weren't high-end security cams. They were tiny, discreet, and about as subtle as I could get without hiring a Hollywood spy crew. Grainy as they were, they still showed what needed to be shown, and at this point, I didn't care if it looked like it was shot on a potato. It was proof, or at least the start of it. The next day, I called Joseph. Joseph was the lawyer. Old school, sharp-eyed, cynical to the bone, and smarter than anyone dared give him credit for. He'd known me since I was a kid running barefoot around my grandfather's property, and back then, he'd worked closely with my grandpa on all sorts of legal matters. If anyone could help me sort through the mess I was knee-deep in, it was Joseph. I met him at his cluttered office where time seemed to have frozen somewhere around 1994. Folders stacked in towers, an old leather chair that creaked louder than a haunted house, and a coffee mug that probably hadn't been washed since Clinton was in office. But Joseph? He was laser-focused. I laid it all out for him. The safe, the missing contents, Dana's weird behavior, Victoria's uninvited house tours, and my growing suspicion that this wasn't just about family drama. This was about something a lot darker. Joseph listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin like he was praying to the gods of cross-examination. When I finished, he gave a slow nod, leaned back and said, "All right, let's have some fun." First, he took the hard drive with the footage and handed it off to one of his tech guys, someone who specialized in forensic audio and, more interestingly, lip reading. The sound on the cameras was garbage, but this guy could supposedly piece together a full conversation just by watching mouths move. Creepy? Yeah, but exactly what I needed. Then Joseph brought in Mike. Mike looked like someone who'd either be a bar bouncer or a guy you call when you want someone to disappear, quietly. Turns out he was a private investigator with a reputation for digging up skeletons in places even the skeletons forgot they were buried. Joseph told him, "Focus on Victoria. She's a mystery wrapped in silk and perfume. Let's find out who she was before she decided to be whatever this is now." Weeks passed. I played the waiting game, pretended everything was fine at home, smiled at Dana's fake concern, and acted like I wasn't counting the seconds until Joseph's call. Then one afternoon, it finally came. Back in Joseph's office, he didn't waste time. He dropped a thick manila folder on the desk like it was a brick and said, "Your mother-in-law's resume makes Ocean's 11 look like amateur hour." I flipped through page after page and felt my jaw get lower with each one. Victoria hadn't always been the high society woman she liked to portray. Turns out she'd started out as a caregiver for elderly clients, nothing unusual. But her career path had a pattern, a disturbing one. One of her early clients was an older woman with no surviving family. After a year of dedicated care, Victoria ended up inheriting a sizable portion of the woman's estate. Legally? Barely? Ethically? Questionable at best. Next, she married an aging gentleman from a well-off family, the kind of man whose relatives were already circling the will like vultures. But somehow Victoria came out on top after his death, managing to scoop up enough inheritance to set herself up quite comfortably, despite legal challenges from the man's actual blood relatives. Then came Dana, a child born from what was described as a brief relationship. No name for the father, no records, just a convenient little miracle that gave Victoria a new role, single mother. After that, she seemed to bounce around strange non-profit organizations and advocacy groups, all focused on senior care. But according to Mike's notes, none of them had lasting paper trails, and some had already been quietly shut down. Gold digger wasn't even the right word. Victoria was a strategic opportunist in designer heels. But then Joseph handed me one last document, not in the folder, just a single sheet of paper. He didn't say a word, just slid it across the desk with a look that made my stomach twist before I even saw the ink. I glanced down, read the first few lines, and froze. It felt like someone had poured a bucket of ice water straight into my chest. The title at the top of the page hit me like a hammer. Transcript of conversation, Dana and Victoria, home office camera, kitchen angle. I blinked a few times, swallowing the dryness in my throat, and then began to read. The lip-reading expert had done a hell of a job considering the video looked like it was filmed through a bottle of maple syrup. Line by line, the words felt like poison slowly soaking into my skin. Victoria's voice, though silent on video, came to life on paper. She was telling Dana that I, her loving husband, was the sole legal owner of a very valuable inheritance. She claimed I had more than just that old house. I had property, accounts, art, and God knows what else. She called the contents of the safe sentimental trash and said the real treasure was hidden elsewhere, and Dana needed to keep playing her part until they found it. The next part made my stomach churn. Victoria told Dana that once they had all the necessary documents, she had a friend, a notary no less, who could help reconfigure the paperwork. A little tweaking, she'd said, and suddenly the wealth will be in the right hands, our hands. But she wasn't done. Victoria leaned in, according to the transcript, and said the quiet part out loud, the truly disgusting part. He's already acting unstable. We'll push that narrative. Everyone will believe it. In a month or two, we'll have him evaluated and then placed. Placed? As if I was a broken appliance. She meant a psychiatric hospital. They wanted to lock me away, frame me as the crazy one, sweep me out of the picture like dust under a rug. Dana hesitated. At least that's what the transcript suggested. She said it was too much, that it scared her. But Victoria was ready. She soothed her daughter with soft words and cold logic. You'll be free. No more pretending. You can live how you want. Be with who you want. No more boring life. No more Mark. She even tossed in the line, think of it as your chance to be reborn. Like screwing your husband over was some kind of self-care retreat. By the end of the transcript, my hands were shaking. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and looked up at Joseph, who was quietly observing me like a chess master waiting for my next move. I'm going to catch them red-handed, I said, each word slow and precise. I want you to be ready. I want everything documented, every paper airtight. We're not just talking revenge. I want them in prison for a long, long time. Joseph gave a small nod, the corner of his mouth twitching into something halfway between approval and amusement. You're a gutsy one, kid. We could have started formal legal proceedings right now. We have more than enough. But I'm guessing you want to make sure no loopholes, no denials, no escape. I nodded. Exactly. I want them buried in their own lies. I want the moment they realize they're caught to be burned into their memory forever. No chances, no maybes, just justice. Joseph leaned back, laced his fingers and said, Then let's do it your way, but you'd better be sure, Mark. One misstep and they'll vanish like ghosts. I looked down at the transcript again. Don't worry, I muttered. I'm going to set the trap, and this time I'll be the one holding the keys. I went full theater mode. I wanted to bait the trap just right, so I made sure Dana saw everything. I left my laptop open with pages about safes, even circled models in a catalog like I was shopping for a luxury car. When the delivery was scheduled, I told Dana directly, I figured it's time to upgrade, after the whole empty safe drama. She smiled, polite, a little forced, and nodded like she totally supported the idea, though I could see the curiosity twitching behind her eyes. A few days later, I brought out the main course, a folder stuffed with real-looking legal documents. A little yellowed, a few stamps, even a fake family crest for drama. Turns out, I said, casually laying it on the coffee table, my grandfather left some assets behind. Legal stuff. Apparently there was a clause. I couldn't access any of it until this year. Bureaucracy is a beautiful nightmare. I laughed like it was all a minor inconvenience, while Dana's face did a weird thing. Half smile, half stunned silence. I added, honestly, I haven't had time to really go through all this, and I've got another business trip coming up in a few days. Imagine a whole week doing boring stuff in another city. I could see her mentally circling that timeline like a hawk over roadkill. The new safe arrived the next morning. Big, modern, sleek. The kind that made the old pirate chest-style one look like a toy. I had it bolted into the floor of the office closet. Digital keypad, clean lines, the perfect prop. I made a big show of organizing my inheritance, putting the folder inside, fiddling with the lock, mumbling numbers to myself like I was still deciding on the code. I even made the passcode something insultingly simple, just in case they got cocky. Dana played it cool. Overly cool. She congratulated me like I'd just won a free blender. Wow, that's great news, babe. You really deserve some good luck. She kissed me like a supportive spouse, then went right back to scrolling on her phone. 2 days later, I packed a suitcase, kissed Dana goodbye, and drove off like any other husband heading out for work. Except, I didn't go far. Just a local hotel with a decent view, stable Wi-Fi, and most importantly, a front row seat to the surveillance system I now treated like my personal Netflix. The decoy documents in the safe were solid, a mix of official-looking nonsense and meaningless legal jargon, worthless, but convincing enough to stir greed. The stage was set. The next morning, not even 24 hours after I left, Dana took the bait. She went on a little shopping trip. The second she pulled out of the driveway, guess who came strolling in like she owned the place? Victoria. She had a key. Of course she did. I watched on my screen as she entered smoothly without hesitation, moving through my house like a predator checking her territory. When she reached the office and saw the new safe, she froze. She bent over, studied the keypad, clearly annoyed. Her lips moved. The camera didn't catch everything, but I didn't need sound to read frustration. The expression was loud enough. A little later, Dana returned, and now things got spicy. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but this time they were not whispering. They were arguing. Victoria looked pissed, gesturing, pointing at the safe like it personally insulted her. Dana kept responding, her arms crossed, defensive. I leaned in, watching like I was on the edge of a thriller. Based on body language, Victoria was chewing her out for not describing the safe properly. She clearly expected something simpler, something old, easy to crack. Instead, she got Fort Knox light. I immediately called Joseph and filled him in. Later that evening, Victoria stepped outside, pulled out her phone, and made a call. She paced the patio, voice low, hand covering her mouth, but one phrase slipped out clearly: tomorrow, 10 p.m. Then she hung up and left. That was all I needed, I told Joseph. He didn't even hesitate. I'm sending 2 guys, quiet, professional. They'll be there tomorrow. You'll have backup. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the footage, rewinding, fast-forwarding, memorizing expressions, preparing. I had one shot to catch them in the act, to end this circus the way it deserved to end, with handcuffs and cold, hard justice. Tomorrow at 10, the curtain goes up. The day felt longer than any I could remember. From early morning, Dana was in motion, rushing around, stuffing clothes into a bag, and heading out with all the enthusiasm of someone chasing her own alibi. The house stayed empty all day, quiet, still, like it was holding its breath. I waited in my hotel room with Joseph's guys, 2 big, silent types who looked like they wrestled bears for cardio. The plan was simple: wait till 10 p.m. If Victoria showed up, we'd be ready. At 9:30 p.m., we got into position, parked a few blocks away, lights off, engine off, hearts pounding. I strapped on the GoPro, chest-mounted, discreet, and fully charged. If anything went wrong, I wanted more than just my word on the record. I wanted video, sound, timestamp, the works. Right at 10, like clockwork, the front door creaked open. Victoria slipped inside with all the grace of a cat burglar, dressed in black, face tense with focus. Behind her was a man in a baseball cap and coveralls, lugging a tool bag. No introductions, no hesitation. Straight to the office. They didn't even bother turning on the lights. They moved like they already had the floor plan memorized. On the security feed, I watched them kneel by the safe. The guy pulled out tools and got to work, whispering with Victoria. The digital lock was trickier than she expected, and it showed. But eventually, with a soft beep and a satisfying click, the door swung open. Victoria practically dove inside, pulling out the folder of fake documents I'd planted. She flipped through them, eyes lighting up. Jackpot. Or so she thought. That was our cue. We moved fast and silent, slipping through the back door like shadows. Inside the house, everything was tense and still, until we turned the corner. There they were. Victoria and the safecracker froze like kids caught stealing cookies, except they were holding what they thought was $1 million dessert. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Mark?" she gasped, like she'd seen a ghost. Then came the panic. The guy tried to bolt, but Joseph's men had him pinned before he hit the hallway. Victoria backed into the wall, clutching the folder like a lifeline. The GoPro caught it all. The folder, the faces, the flailing excuses. Exactly 20 minutes later, the police arrived. Joseph had timed the call perfectly. By then, the evidence was locked down, the suspects were detained, and my heart had finally stopped trying to punch its way out of my chest. What followed was a whirlwind. A full-blown investigation kicked off, thanks to Joseph's connections in all the right places. Victoria was cooked. Her friendly notary turned out to be involved in more shady paperwork than a forged passport ring. The safecracker had a record as long as a CVS receipt. And Dana? She was dragged in for conspiracy. They found her a few towns over, still pretending to be on a yoga retreat. When she was brought into the station and saw me, she completely unraveled, sobbing, screaming, demanding to know how I could do this to her. I didn't say a word, just looked at her the same way I'd look at a stranger. A very, very disappointing stranger. She tried to plead her case, but no one was buying it. The court found her guilty of aiding and abetting, and while her sentence was lighter, it was still a sentence. Enough to make it count. As for Victoria and her little gang, they got hit with fraud, breaking and entering, conspiracy, and attempted theft. Let's just say their next family reunion would be in matching jumpsuits behind bulletproof glass. The divorce went through fast. Clean, efficient, cathartic. In the end, I stood free, a little bruised, a lot more cautious, but no longer under threat of being gaslit into a psychiatric ward, while my life's work got pawned off by my wife and her mother. It could have gone the other way. I'd imagined it more than once, the alternative ending where I end up broke, alone, and locked up, whispering to white walls that I'm sane. Joseph and I shared a quiet drink the evening after the verdicts came in. Sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, I said, I tried living low-key. I stayed quiet, private, didn't flash anything around. I thought if I didn't draw attention, I could avoid this kind of mess. Joseph gave a small shrug, raised his glass and said, Turns out even quiet wealth makes noise. I nodded, letting the silence fill the space. At least it's over. I kept the house, the legacy, and more importantly, my freedom. And with that, we toasted. Not just to justice, but to survival. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.